Bar Harbor residents will once again next week be voting on a ballot question regarding cruise ship passengers. Will Wagner has more.
Following lawsuits against the town after a vote in 2022 to limit cruise ship passengers, Bar Harbor residents will be asked next Tuesday if they want to set a higher cap on the number of passengers that can come ashore each day.
Remember, we have a question asking the town citizens to repeal current land use ordinance, which is the current way that we're managing cruise ship visitation in the town of Bar Harbor.
What's on the ballot next Tuesday is whether the citizens will vote to cancel the 2022 legislation. If the citizens vote to cancel, the council has already passed an alternative set of rules, which we think would be disastrous for democracy in Bar Harbor.
Amid lawsuits from those on both sides of the issue, the town is taking a new approach to managing cruise ships with this ballot question, although some feel that was already established in 2022.
Our staff and legal team and the council worked together to create a new system for managing visitation, cruise ship visitation, that is a licensing contract approach. So our approach requires cruise ships to have a license to visit and a reservation to visit the town of Bar Harbor. And inside of that contract and reservation system are the caps for a limitation, including a daily cap of 3,200.
They scared the town council. Town council doesn't know what to do with being sued. And now they're being sued by that side for the limitations, and they're being sued by the citizens, AKA myself, for not observing and executing the laws.
If passed, the new ordinance would also shift the burden of enforcing the cap from pier owners to the cruise lines.
So we've been in court defending the constitutionality of the ordinance, as well as figuring out the rules for implementing it. And the council started to run into more litigation questions, as well as challenges with actually implementing it. So we directed staff to bring back an alternative to that land use ordinance.
Basically, we sued the town for rewriting what I would say is illegally rewriting the ordinance and directing their employees not to execute it. I mean, how does a town government do that? There's law on the books, and they admitted in public and in writing that they are changing the law. They're not observing it, and they've told their employees not to enforce it. I mean, come on.
If Article 4 passes, the new ordinance would also include monthly and annual passenger caps. Will Wagner, WABI News, Bar Harbor.